Good morning. I'm Bill O'Reilly, Director at Edison Group Ireland. I'd like to welcome you all to Edison Think Tank. Edison Think Tank is a series of Zoom calls that we will roll out over the coming weeks, addressing issues surrounding COVID-19 and the opportunities which will arise. Today's call is learning from Asia's response to COVID-19. We've a range of participants on our call. From Germany, Ireland and the UK. I'd like to welcome our speakers, David Fergusson, who's principal at Nimoi Holdings Pte, a family investment company based in Singapore, established in 1959, and Edward Chan, who's former head of Asian equities at Royal London Asset Management and previously at Foreign and Colonial. Our call will last 20 minutes, followed by Q&A. All will be on mute for the duration of the call, and when you're asking questions at the end, for those of you familiar, maybe Aldrina will run through this at the end, but there's I'm not that familiar, so I guess a lot of us aren't with Zoom, but top right hand corner there's three dots. You click on the three dots and a raise hand icon appears. You click on that. We're aware that you wish to ask a question, and we go through the questions in rotation. So now I'd like to start the call. I think I'd like to start with David and Singapore. There seems to be a special relationship that has built in Singapore between the government and its people. There seems to be an element of buy-in. What measures are in place to secure that buy-in, and how has it driven Singapore's success in dealing with COVID-19, David?
I guess there's a few points here. I mean, the first thing I would say is that Singapore's been incredibly prepared for this. We obviously went through SARS a little, well, I guess 15 to 17 odd years ago. I can't remember exactly the date. And since then, they've built up a series of very clear policies and procedures and guidelines for this type of event. And they have been very, very good at communicating that to us. I mean, it's been frankly startling. And Singapore, you live in Singapore long enough, you get used to pretty good governance. But even by Singapore standards, this has been remarkable in terms of how they've done that. There's been constant messaging between the state and the citizenry here, and it's been frankly incredibly competent, very reassuring.
Okay, and we hear of the Minister of Health, their website, the WhatsApp that they have. Could you?
Let me just. I mean, I'll just show you this because it's quite interesting. I can hit share on my screen. See, hopefully you can see that. So this is. I mean, we were asked to sign up for this about. It would have been about 6 to 8 weeks ago, and from that point on, we've had 2 or 3 messages from the government every day talking about things like the additional measures that are being put in place. There's typically one on the number of cases on a daily basis, and you can click into them and it'll take you to the Ministry of Health website. So, I mean, this has been their first line of making sure that we are we're well informed about what's going on. So we know pretty much every single case. And if you go to the website, you'll see what this looks like. So this is the Ministry of Health website. You click on here. I mean, it's obviously, it's pretty clear from this what their principal concern is. It takes you to the key page. They're really trying to make sure that no misinformation is going around. So they clarify rumors and that type of stuff. Then they give you all of the daily case information, what it is, what it looks like in terms of the number of reported cases, the number of long-term residents who have it, the number of visitors who have it, and it goes through, and there's a whole raft of information here. And I think the one that is most interesting is this dashboard panel that they give us, right, which shows us exactly the number of hospitalized people, the number of people who've basically been diagnosed with it, the number of people who've been discharged. Obviously, this chart is a function of these two. And they give us a whole load of other information, including case-by-case information. So, latest person, 17, male, and is at Singapore General Hospital. This case 557, age 68, male at the National Centre for Infectious Diseases, and where they're being quarantined. So I mean, they are giving us so much information that, you know, there's really very little excuse to not be extremely well informed as to what the state is doing and what we should be doing as well. And frankly, you know, because they generally do such a good job of this sort of stuff, that if we're told to do something like this, you don't really have to think twice, you just do it, because by and large it's the right thing to do.
Okay, very good. And I see, interesting enough, that there's an uptick in numbers there on that chart. So Edward, we're seeing an increase in numbers in Singapore, likewise in Hong Kong. Could you share with me what's being developed in terms of, we hear 14-day quarantines, wristbands, etc. What measures is Hong Kong adopting at the moment, Edward?
Well, it's similar to Singapore. We now only allowed local residents to come into Hong Kong, and tourists are not allowed, and they are not allowed to transit either. And for those Hong Kong residents that enter Hong Kong, those with symptoms has to be tested and quarantined within the government premises. And those without symptoms have to be self-quarantined at a place of their choice. And some of them which came from high-risk countries or the high-risk group, they need to produce a sample for testing for virus.
Okay.
And well, because the cases the number of cases has gone up, so there's a fear that the infection rate has gone up. So the government is planning to reduce the size of public gatherings, i.e., they try to stop people going to bar, club, etc., and then trying to ban the sale of alcohol in restaurant and bar.
Okay.
So the whole idea is to keep the transmission rate under control. That is the number one priority.
Okay. I've seen in the press this talk about people having to wear wristbands. Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. That's how they monitor the quarantine process. So when you pass through the Hong Kong immigration, if you are self-quarantining, they will give you a wristband with a QR code on it that would link to your mobile phone, and the mobile phone will do a GPS communication with the government, so the government will know where you're about all the time. So if you don't have a mobile phone, the government will lend you one.
Okay.
Well,
Very
just like the old person, right?
Yeah.
You know, some of the old people, they still use old time Nokia phones.
Okay. And sticking with technology, David, I hear of, there's a WhatsApp group that the government has. There's a reverse Tinder type technology that
yeah. So we've been asked. So again, there've been a progression of these policies. So Singapore's asked us to do lots of different things, which if they'd asked us to do all at once would have been overwhelming. But the latest one, which is really about contact tracing, and they've been incredibly aggressive in their approach to contact tracing. They really are looking for, you know, all the potentially sort of infected people. And so they've given us this app now, which we just download. I'll ping it to you. You can send it to all the participants later. They can have a look at it. But what we do is we download it onto our phone, and it does two things. One, it maps where we are at any particular point in time, but it also maps us relative to someone else via a Bluetooth connection. So if my Bluetooth connection pings someone else's Bluetooth connection because we're within a few feet of each other, then it will register that we've been close to one another. So when it comes time to tracking infections in the future, they can just look back and see who's been in contact or who's been near people, and it's a very, very quick process at that point.
And will you be notified that you were in such and such a location and you were in the proximity of someone who had who's been diagnosed?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean they'll invariably they'll just call the phone and tell us to sort of come in, frankly, and we'll come in for testing. I mean, we're not exactly sure of how that'll work, but I'm fairly certain it will be something like that. I mean, what I will say is this is an entirely, I mean, going back to our relationship with the state here, it's an entirely voluntary thing. You don't have to download it onto your phone. And so far, I think about 1.1, 1.2 million people have downloaded it and put it on their phone. And it was only given out to us three days ago.
Okay, very impressive. And in terms of your office, what do you do every day in terms of people coming into the building? Are they heat mapped? Do they check their temperature? What's the protocol?
So again, it's very much joined up thinking. So the Ministry of Manpower has sent us, a whole load of. I mean, basically all employers have been sent, a bunch of, guidelines. And the guideline in Singapore doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as it means in Ireland or other places. So the guidelines are all of your employees are recommended to work from home if they can, and so quite a lot of ours are. If they are coming into the office, then we should try and avoid having meetings in the office, right? If they come into the office, they've got to take their temperature before they come and let us know that there's no issue with their temperature. They're also supposed to take their temperature at the end of each day. Most buildings are implementing that policy as well, so that there's a secondary set of testing as you go in and out of the building, so that happens as well. So people are certainly having their temperatures taken. In addition to that, we've got to do things like have a variety of different cleaning protocols. So we have to clean all the frequent contact areas, and we have to have the hand sanitizers all over the office and that type of stuff. So I mean, literally, we've all got this on our desks, and we're constantly doing this, right? And I think those are the principal ones. But I mean, it's not, frankly, not that disruptive to us.
Okay, all right, very good, thank you. So coming back to the original slide that we had there for Singapore with the increase in cases.
You want me to put it back up?
Yeah, that'll be interesting enough. Yeah, well, I'm actually going to switch to Edward now in a second.
Okay, I won't put it up.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, it looks as though China bought the rest of the world time. Gave us a forewarning. Edward, do you think that Hong Kong and Singapore acted very swiftly once we got that early indication from Wuhan, and that maybe in a way that the rest of the world has squandered that time?
Yes, to some extent, because we have the experience of the SARS. So, as David said, we tend to very cooperative with the government. We tend to be very careful once those crises arises. We're very careful with personal hygiene. Like we started to avoid mass gathering, like washing hands, and then cleaning all those lift button, door handles, etc. Basically, disinfect everything on a very frequent basis. And when we have feel unwell, we would go to be tested, and we are quite frank with the government of telling where we have been, so that they can find out the close contact persons and quarantine them and test them. That all helps to keep everything under control. Yes, I mean, so we, as David said, the public in Hong Kong have quite a general understanding for the government of what should be doing. To the West, yes, I think they have wasted some valuable time to keep the infection rate at the early times. But now I think they are learning now. I mean, the West. I mean, I'm glad that they have a complete lockdown. I'm just taking the Hubei province experience, and I'm glad to see that the number of new cases in Italy seems to be finally peaking. It has dropped for 2 days, but unfortunately yesterday it had risen a bit. But it seems to be peaking. So yes, they lost some valuable time, but at least I think I'm grateful that it seems to be sort of under control now in Europe.
Okay, very good. David, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, we've been through this before, so we know what the playbook was for SARS, and Edward will have just recognised quite a lot of the policies that were implemented. But I remember speaking to friends of mine, you know, I guess 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago in the UK, and just saying, look, you know, be careful of this, take this stuff seriously, and saying, you know, social distancing. I mean, obviously washing your hands, right? But social distancing really, really helps, because you just starve the virus of its conduit for spread. And you know, people scoffed at me and all that sort of stuff. I'm overreacting and all of that sort of stuff, and it's deeply upsetting and quite frustrating. But you know, I'm very, very glad that now some people are taking it pretty seriously. The thing that is deeply upsetting about it is that the longer you wait, the more restrictive your social distancing measures have to be, because it's you know, the virus has already taken hold. And that, you know, if you look at what Italy did, it's like Hubei, right, which was, you know, very, very restrictive. And you know, in other parts of China, it was necessarily less so. And in Singapore now, you know, frankly, you know, I mean, I can go out to the pub tonight. You know, I mean, you can still do those sorts of things, and it's because we've been so aggressive at the very early stage of it. Now that doesn't help people particularly, you know, in Ireland or you know, other parts of Europe who are now much further along in the spread of this through the community than we are. But what I will say is that, you know, the social distancing measures really, really, really work, and you know, they're definitely worth taking seriously. And I feel just through the media that there is that sea change that's happened, and I'm very glad of that.
Super, great. Okay, so finally, maybe I'll just flip to Edward for a second. You're both obviously, as are everyone on this call, really very heavily involved in markets. Well, Edward, what are your thoughts on markets finally at this point in time?
God, market is volatile, if I can find it. Well, I think at the moment what the market seems to be trying to price in the risk of the virus, how much damage it to the economy or to corporate profit. I think they for it to for market to stabilize, they need to have confidence that the whole situation is under control. I don't know whether it's pure coincidence or not. The market has been well, at least stabilizing or start recover a bit, because I don't know whether it's coincidence or what. To that, in Italy, the case has the new cases seems to have peaked. So if you follow the model, I'm not talking about Trump saying that, okay, he's hopeful that USA will be reopened by Easter. But then when you look at it like the Wuhan example or Chinese example, if you really clamp it down, that yes, the whole thing will go into sort of free fall. But then after 2 months and a bit, like Wuhan, Hubei is reopening soon. So yeah, you slam it for you slam everything down for 2 months. So after that, I mean, you in the meantime, you make sure that there's no big bankruptcy, the banking system wouldn't go under. Then maybe looking back from next year or 2 years later, it may be just a blip. But who knows? I mean, now it depends a lot of how the government is managing the situation, but whether they manage to keep the transmission rate under control and keep the new cases down. That's the point. But so far, it's hopeful. Things are moving the right direction.
Okay, very good, very good. Okay, David, would you be a buyer?
Oh, look, I think we're entering yet another period of governments playing an incredibly important role in market behaviour. Do I think it's an out and out buy? No. I mean, I think the economic impact of this is going to be absolutely enormous, and it's akin. I mean, I'm not wanting to go into sort of real cliches, but it's akin to a war, right? I mean, there'll be a lot of dead people, and the only difference between this and a war is that there won't be the collateral damage to infrastructure. But how we come out the other end will depend very much on how governments behave. I mean, I think. I mean, frankly, I think this quantitative easing component is really there at the moment just to tide over the markets to ensure that there isn't a financial collapse immediately. But it doesn't help us get out the other end, and I think they're going to have to be a whole load of different policies that relate to the monetary system, infrastructure spending that really prime the economies after this. But really, we've got to get through this process without the financial system collapsing.
Okay, all right. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much. I'd like to maybe hand over back to Aldrino. If anyone's got some questions, please, if you could raise the blue hand and we'll take it from there. Aldrino, do we have any questions?
No one's raised a hand yet.
Okay. Does everyone know?
There's Klaus. There's Klaus who's just raised his hand. Klaus, all yours.
Yeah. Well, Edward, and thank you very much, and David, thank you very much for the. It was very, very interesting. What I'm trying to get my head around is how do you think in Asia about reopening the market? Obviously, Trump is saying he wants to open it by Easter, but how do you guys, with all the experience you have, I mean, what are the right steps? How you do it to basically try to get the economy opened again? Thanks.
Well, I mean, in terms of, I mean, as I understand it, the US market's just trading electronically at the moment. So it's not like the markets have closed. I mean, I do think that these circuit breakers on the downside are sensible to just stop market trading for intermittent periods throughout the day, so that we don't get these vicious cycles in between the various different trading structures. In terms of how one gets the economy going again, I mean, the collateral damage to large amounts of the service sector in the economy and changes to behaviour that come out of this will be quite significant. So my sense is that there's going to have to be a lot of investment-driven stimulus. So I mean, the concept of lower interest rates and quantitative easing, yes, they'll stop a financial collapse right now, but I mean, the idea of us going off and spending because our interest rate costs have dropped from 0.7 to 0.3% on a lease on a sofa is just not going to cut anything, right? What we're going to need to see is massive road building programs, massive construction, driven investment that sees real money go into the economy again. And I think that's what's going to have to happen. But I don't know how they do that without changing, frankly, the current structure of the government finances and the government debt world. That's a more problematic situation.
Well, thank you. And also with regard to stopping the social distancing, sort of like, does it from your perspective work to just say we isolate the vulnerable, the elderly, and then the rest is going back to work?
Oh, look, I mean, I'll let Edward answer on this one as well. But I mean, I think my sense is that that playbook is very much untested. So we just don't know. I mean, I would suspect that the idea of just isolating the elderly may be what they have to do in America, but I don't think that's necessarily going to stop the spread to the elderly, just because that is, I think, quite impractical. I also think that just because the elderly are the most susceptible, it doesn't mean that the rest of the population is unsusceptible. I mean, a lot of people will die in the less than 40 age group. I mean, it's going to be difficult to stomach that.
Thanks.
Okay, we have another question from a person called Jomo. Jomo,
yeah,
you can ask you. Go ahead, please.
It's Joe Motley here. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much to Edward and David for that briefing. It's very informative. I didn't really have a question so much as an observation, and it just struck me hearing you describe the measures taken in both Singapore and in Hong Kong. That you guys over there have been much more clever in making use of IT. In dealing with it than we seem to be in Europe. The various smartphone apps and the Bluetooth tracking and so on. That's very clever, and there's no reason I would have thought why it couldn't be done here. But as far as I'm aware, it's not being contemplated.
Look, I mean, I would agree with you. I mean, what I would say is that if senior politicians from Ireland want this technology, I feel fairly certain the Singaporeans will give it to them, but they have to approach it, through the correct channels. I'm sure it'll be given, because I mean the stuff isn't expensive. It's just a matter of preparedness. The key thing for us is that we were just prepared.
Thank you.
Yeah. And some of that technology is quite simple, really.
Edward wanted to say something.
Can I add to it? I mean, yeah, well, you're right. Technology is the key. Let's just not to focus on, just the wristband and the stuff to control the spread of the virus. Actually, technology helped us to survive this for very long. For example, I think in UK or in Europe, in Hong Kong now, Singapore has reopened the schools, but our schools are still closed. I mean, even my kids in UK, I mean, they are doing online learning now with the school, and a lot of companies sort of rely on working from home and telephone conferencing or video conferencing. And even shopping everything is online now. Well, Deliveroo is making a killing in Hong Kong. It's not just tech in the sense. I mean, and to just make you think. I mean, 5G will be so important. I mean, I think sorry. I think in UK, I mean, I heard that. I mean, Netflix has to reduce its bandwidth just to allow everybody to have a bigger share of the bandwidth in internet. So I think technology is quite critical to help us to get through this crisis. Actually, not just yeah, the GPS on the apps to tell the government where you are, but a lot of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Edward. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Do you want to just, I was going to suggest if you could just unmute everyone, just in case there's anyone trying to raise a hand.
Bill?
Yeah.
It's Bernard. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, Bernard. Yeah.
Guys, thank you very much, Edward and David. We know, or we're told, it'll take a long time to get a vaccine for this. So let's assume that's right, 1 year to 2 years or whatever. But we read a lot that there are already trial-approved drugs that, you know, whether we call them antiviral, anti-arthritic, anti-malarial, etc. Have these been used in Singapore and Hong Kong in dealing with this? Have we any? Can you give us any feedback? Because these things would be particularly important in systems where we're trying to flatten the hump. In other words, where the hospital system is particularly inadequate for the challenges that would come if the curve was not flattened. Has there been any use of these, and can we take any hope from these that they will be a significant aid in slowing the rate at which hospitals might be overloaded?
Edward, do you want to take that, or?
Okay. For vaccine, not in this moment. What the latest I heard is that they, by the way, for SARS, there's still no vaccine. I don't know whether because there are so few people sort of infected. There's no vaccine for SARS yet. But for this COVID-19, what I heard the latest is that they managed to isolate the main protein of the virus. So it's on the way, and they are now doing the testing, first of animal and then human. So the problem is that if you want to go through the whole process, you go for animal, then human, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, whatever, then it's unlikely that the vaccine will be ready until maybe next year. But however, I was heard that mainly from the Chinese. I mean, Chinese they tend to short circuit things. They said they could get. Don't quote me, okay? They said they could get one ready in April for emergency use, i.e. non-tested. So if you're really desperate, there could be one ready soon. So the idea is that I think it's there. I mean, the DNA sequence is there. And I think it depends on how the government can short circuit or fast track that process.
And how has the hospital system in Hong Kong been using any of the already trial approved drugs that would deal with the symptoms? They're not cures and they're not preventative, but deal with the symptoms like the anti-inflammatories. Has that been a significant factor in Singapore in dealing with the symptoms, so that, you know, those most vulnerable people that would be really using the facilities of the hospitals can be treated faster or become less critical?
So I'll say I've had the misfortune of having rather a lot to do with intensive care units over the course of the last 10 years. And I'll say the following. Firstly, look, I mean, in relation to the drugs, well, I'll say Singapore has a very different philosophy, I think, than some socialized medical regimes around the world. So they don't treat the herd here. They treat the individual, and they have a philosophy within the medical hierarchy in Singapore that no matter what, they never ever give up on the individual. So the idea of them trying to discharge people or refuse people at the door of the hospital because they're too old is something that they won't do. So they don't give up, and they will really go to the ends of the earth to make sure that the patient survives. And I've seen this firsthand with a number of different people. And I think that matters, because it means that they're not making a financial decision in relation to the treatment. They're making a decision on treatment, and then the financial consideration is somewhere in the background, which means that we have genuinely well-resourced facilities here. And I don't know specifically. I hear rumours that we will try things, and and they will try things here in Singapore. They're not afraid to have a go, particularly if the alternative is death. So I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know. There are rumours that float around, but again, we don't know.
Can I join you?
Is important, I think.
Just very quickly, Edward, because we're going to move on to the final question.
There's no magic bullet at this time, but there has been some success story using a mixture of viral drugs, and then using the antibodies from previous patients that could help. But the important thing is that I think, just like flu, a lot of people have to be kept in the hospital in the ICU unit, so that they can well look after, and most of them can recover by themselves. The problem that's why the mortality rate is so low in Hong Kong, Singapore, outside Wuhan. But it's very high in Italy because they just overloaded the hospital. They just cannot have the ICU ward. They don't have the respiratory equipment to look after the people affected. Well, that's why maybe in Germany the death rate is so low so far, but Italy is very high. So it's a combination of factors. So that's all I have to say. There's no magic bullet, but some form of treatment has proved to be quite useful.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we've one final question before we wrap up, please.
Bill, can I ask a question? Roland here.
Yes, Roland, please.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah, it's and thanks very much everybody for contributions. It's more of a thought experiment. So you meet people out and about, and they say it'll be very different after this, okay, or things will change, okay, and it's kind of left. So I've been conducting a mini survey, which I may expand further, but that's by the by, into what do you mean by that? Okay, so when we're on here and we say, okay, this is a big shock to the system, massive shock to the system, things will be different. So I find it, just to sort of put it out there, as to what do we mean by it'll be different. I think you and I briefly touched upon this the other day, just in a different chat, and Bill said to me, what does this do for popularism, for example? And my take was, it's cut the legs off it, okay? So populism could be summarized by people who like chaos and think the idea of chaos is a little bit interesting, because so I think this kills it. But in a lot of other areas, so it's just sort of is put it out there, to try and get, what is it, how after this has passed will things be very different? I think David touched on it briefly as well in a little bit. We could have much bigger government, okay? But anyway, it's kind of in the group, sort of throw out people's opinions or comments as to how things might be very different after this.
Can I address that one?
Yeah.
So can I address that one, Bill? Yeah. Okay. Because you're muted, Bill, so I can't hear what you're saying. So yeah. Yes, I think things will be very different, and I think there will be. And frankly, as a sort of fairly arch libertarian, I find it difficult to actually say this. But when you look around the world, having been through this sort of thing before, you could point to the countries that were going to do okay in this. and they're ones, you know, where there is a real sense of national purpose, right? So you knew the Koreans were going to get it right. You knew the Taiwanese were going to get it right. You knew the Singaporeans were going to get it right. And in the Western world, the one that you knew for sure will get it right, the Israelis. And all of these countries have, you know, one thing in common, to my mind, is they've got a really, I mean, they're not neoliberal societies in any way, shape or form. They're quite Confucian, or in the case of Israel, they're bound together in a slightly different way. But they all have a very strong sense of common purpose. And that is built around, you know, frankly, a lot of sort of social politics, social political politics of the state, right? And I think where you look at this sort of very, very sort of socially liberal approaches in Europe, they've been anathema to the sort of policies that have caused us to be successful in fighting this problem. Now, I think, yeah, I mean, I think that will be a change. Now, the last thing I'll say on this is that just because you get a more cohesive national policy and national direction does not necessarily mean you have to have a larger state, because our state here in Singapore is roughly half the size of, well, less than half the size of the UK's state as a proportion of GDP. So we can have these things without having, you know, a very socialist country. Does that make sense?
Okay, Ken.
Yep, very much so. Edward,
can I follow up on you then?
Yeah, definitely.
Hello. I don't know actually, because, well, David can correct me if I'm wrong. Well, in Hong Kong, after the SARS, doesn't seem to have such big changes. There may be some short-term changes, but then a lot of old habits remain the same. Okay, I mean, people maybe are more serious about personal hygiene afterwards. Maybe in China after this, they won't be eating those you know, wild games anymore, the wild animals anymore. But I don't know. I mean, maybe for some country that there's lack of spending in healthcare, there may be a bit of revolution, or maybe in the presidential election in US, the Obamacare will come back again. I mean, or Italy will start spending more money on the health service. I don't know. Maybe David is right. Maybe there's what is so now is that EU is a lack of coordination between countries. They need, if the borders are open, you need to fight it together.
See, this is the point at which Edward and I can get into a real sort of Hong Kong versus Singapore situation. So I'm going to try and avoid that. But yeah. I mean, I love Hong Kong, not as much as here, of course, but you know, I do love Hong Kong. But what I will say is that Hong Kong is just a very unique place, because it's a very libertarian place, and it isn't a country. And so the sort of concept of them producing the sort of national policies that we've got here is just not likely. So it's just a difference between the two places where yeah, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay. So maybe will we pause on
without
that
being rude about Hong Kong? I don't mean to be rude about Hong Kong.
Okay, yeah. We try not to take into politics, yeah.
Okay, look, I'd like to thank David and Edward very much for their time on this call. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. We covered a wide range of topics: social, economic, medical, state of the world, populism, and obviously COVID-19. So I hope you all found it food for thought. I hope you found it useful, and we look forward to seeing you again on Edison Think Tank over the coming weeks when we discuss other topics. Thank you once again.